Hello there, this is Dana Arcuri, author, speaker, and wellness advocate, and today's topic is quite different than any other I have ever had. And today's discussion is going to be on cutting ties with dysfunctional family. And so the one thing we have to keep in mind is that we don't choose our family. We are born into a family and we don't have this freedom of choice. So we could understand that there are many dysfunctional families all across our world. I think in this day and age, we are reading about it, hearing about it, and are quite aware of it. And on the same token, nobody talks about it. It seems like a lot of people don't always discuss openly or in a vulnerable manner these painful experiences with our toxic family. And so I am going to be brave today, and I'm not sharing everything because that could get into a huge amount of time. I might actually write a book and a memoir that can tell all. And, that's a future idea that I've been pondering for 1 year. Do you spill the beans? Do you share the truth? The real thing here that stands out to me is, when do we finally say enough is enough? At what point, at what stage in our lives do we call it quits and cut the ties with toxic family members? Or do we just continue this song and dance? That's what it is. When it's a two-way street and different members of the family are carrying on and they're bickering or they're gossiping or they're attacking us physically or verbally, or they're giving us the silent treatment, it can become habitual and to a point where it becomes normal. So something so unhealthy as a toxic relationship can become so common for us that sometimes we could have a distorted reality on what is healthy versus what is unhealthy. And when we are born and raised into these dysfunctional families, we don't know anything better. We don't know any different. So with me, my parents divorced when I was only 2 years old. My mother and 4 older sisters and I relocated to another state, and things were rough. Being brought up in a single parent family without a father and being broke, you can't make much money as a waitress. So my mother struggled financially. She had a lot of burdens, and I can understand, she was stressed out. And most people who are single parents, you will relate to this. It is not an easy pathway to be a single parent, especially a female today. It's very challenging in so many different ways, trying to raise kids, trying to make financial ends meet, and trying to be a mom and a dad. That is just a very tough place to be. And yet there are so many women today who are confronting this, and they're trying to just make ends meet, and they're trying to just stay afloat. And it's very hard. And the thing about growing up in dysfunction is, while we can't choose our family, and while we may feel like as young children and even teenagers that we just can't escape it, you're not an independent person yet, so you are stuck. Most people are stuck unless CYS gets involved and ends up taking the kids away from the parents. A lot of kids are just stuck in a rut. And I know even now when I reconsider everything in my childhood, if my mother was carrying on today the way she did back then, I think CYS would have probably taken my sisters and I off my mother. Now, this isn't to be disrespectful to my mother, but she had a lot of emotional challenges. She had a lot of addictions. She had a lot of pain in her own life. and dysfunctional relationships. I don't know that it was with her own mother and father, but I know it was with a lot of relationships. And even after her and my dad went separate ways, she was in one messed up relationship after another. And so this is what I was brought up with. I mean, this is the kind of stuff I had seen on a day-to-day basis. Men coming and going, a lot of alcohol, a lot of screaming, a lot of carrying on, a lot of crying, a lot of popping pills. It was a difficult childhood, and I was an extremely sad, confused, and troubled child. And I grew up to be a very rebellious and troubled teen. And then, you grow up and you end up getting married, or you end up in relationships, and sometimes you end up in messed up relationships because that's all you know. And it's a season right now where I am confronting my past, because I think everything we go through in our childhood and with dysfunctional, toxic family, it will never go away. We can't run from it. We can't hide from it. Even if we cut the ties, like make it final and we permanently end the relationship, that doesn't mean that we carry on and that we're perfectly fine, because there is great healing that needs to be done. I know even with myself, there are so many things I'm looking at and I'm reevaluating, and I'm reflecting at the toxic behaviors, the unhealthy relationships, the abusiveness that happened when I was a child. And I even had a babysitter who was just mentally disturbed, very unstable. I think she was psychologically unstable. She was really into the occult. I could get into a whole lot, but it gets into some deep stuff that I really don't want to open that can of worms right now. But all I could say is, I am now dealing with the physical, emotional, and spiritual aftermath of this crap that came down when I was a child, and then when I was a teenager, and just different things that have happened to me. And so I am at a place in my life where I need and desire healing, this inner healing. And I believe that we have to ask ourselves, are we in these family relationships because we feel like the blood ties are something that we're forced to maintain? That saying, blood is thicker than water. Do we stay in dysfunctional relationships with our family because we feel we have to? Or do we just say, it's time for clean slate, it's time to cut the ties for good, and to just walk away and then move forward and seek healing and seek restoration? The truth is that we don't have to be a doormat. I'm a Christian woman, but that doesn't mean I'm a doormat. That doesn't mean I'm a punching bag for people who want to verbally or physically abuse me. There comes a time when we have to just say, I have to respect myself. I have to value my worth. I believe that I am a child of God and I deserve better. And I know that while relationships can be very complicated and challenging, that on the same token, we cannot continue tolerating misbehavior, especially when it is abusive and it's habitual and it's dysfunctional. And I could say today, I don't have the answers. Hey, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. But on the same token, I am an author. I am a speaker. I am a wellness advocate. And so that's why it's so near and dear to my heart today for us people who are in dysfunctional relationships to consider getting well, to consider restoration, to consider being healed from this painful experience, because we want to offer our kids a healthier life. We want to raise our children into healthy, productive, happy, whole human beings. And so we don't want this to be generational. And the thing with toxic, dysfunctional relationships are most of them are generational. We could go back and just start going into our background and digging and digging and digging. I mean, I know when I started digging into a few things with my background and my father's side, my mother's side, there are some red flags, big time red flags. And it's helpful to know that we don't have to be perfect and that there's no family that is free from problems. But we also have to really clearly evaluate, are the relationships that we're in with our mothers, with our fathers, with our brothers, with our sisters, with maybe in-laws. In-laws too, they're part of the family. When we get married, we're marrying into families, and we didn't choose these families. We chose our spouse. Hopefully we chose our spouse. I know in some countries, some places they don't get to choose their spouse. They don't have that freedom. But for us, people, men and women who did choose our husbands and wives, we had this freedom of choice. But yet we didn't choose the in-laws. And that's a whole other can of worms that I'm not going to go to today, because that gets into, again, dysfunctional families. And so, and that's another thing too. When we're getting married or we're in a relationship with people, we start to see their dysfunction and their families, and we start talking and we start sharing and we start opening up and communicating about what we went through. And we could really, end up swapping stories about, this is what happened to me. And then they say, well, this is what happened to me. And we find out, wow, like we all are in it together. We're not alone. And oftentimes we feel so alone in these toxic relationships. And sometimes we don't know the answer. We try. And what the thing is, how long do you try? I mean, I'm in my 50s, and it's more painful today than it was when I was in my 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I think part of it is because through age, we're like fine wine through age. We start learning and we start getting wise, and there's wisdom, and there's so much spiritual and personal growth, along with professional growth. And we get to a point where we say, you know what? Like, this is crazy. Insanity is putting up with this crap. Insanity is remaining in a toxic relationship, remaining in a dysfunctional family. And so today I'm just curious, are you relating to this? Did you get raised in a dysfunctional family? It might have only been one parent. It might have been both. It might have been just your siblings or stepsisters and brothers. Nowadays there's so many of us. I know I have stepsisters, and my stepmother's deceased, but that was super challenging. That's not easy when we start having all of these, people added into our life who we didn't choose. I didn't choose for my parents to get divorced. I didn't choose for my dad to remarry, and then this woman wants to tell me what to do, and then you have all this confusion and all this heartache and all this sorrow and pain and depression and anxiety. It's no wonder that there's so many people today who are not emotionally well, that we're battling with anxiety and depression and insomnia and autoimmune disorders. I think that it's interesting that when I've done research on fibromyalgia, because I've been dealing with it for 10 plus years. So yeah, I'm doing research on it. It's a passion of mine. But in the statistics, they say that a lot of people who are diagnosed with fibromyalgia were abused. And, the correlation here is I was abused by a babysitter, a psycho babysitter. It was really, really tough because, when you're 3 and 4 years old, you can't just walk away and you don't really have a voice. And so today, once again, I want to be the voice for the voiceless and be hope for the hopeless. I think there is hope for restoration, and I'm on a pathway of seeking wholeness and seeking health and seeking just becoming my true self, my authentic self. And and also being true to myself. So please share with me your experiences with dysfunction and toxic relationships. God bless.